Welcome everybody to Resisting Big Tech Empires, organised by Global Justice Now and Balanced Economy Project. My name is James Irons. I am the head of movement building at Global Justice Now. And before we start the panel, I just wanted to say a couple of words about why we've organised this conference. Clearly, given how many people have turned up, there is an appetite to have these kinds of discussions. And I think there's two things that for us, though, have really happened that mean that we wanted to focus on the growing and dangerous power of big tech. Obviously, for several decades now, we've seen digital companies become more and more part of the way our whole lives are organised. But in the last couple of years, we've particularly seen an explosion of the use of AI. And I think that's this kind of dangerous new frontier, in a way, in the power of big tech over the rest of the world. The second thing is the second Trump administration. I don't know whether you saw there was a headline just in the papers yesterday. Donald Trump is threatening to impose new tariffs on the UK if we don't drop the digital services tax. So this is a tax that was just a 2% tax on certain big digital companies that was introduced actually by the Tories in 2020. So what we're seeing is not just the growing power of big tech, but Donald Trump and the US state going to battle around the world for big tech. And I think that's a dangerous combination that we wanted to address in this conference. So I'll leave it with that short introduction, and I will hand over to Daisy, who's going to chair the opening panel. Thank you for coming.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming, and welcome to everyone in here and to everyone who's joining online. Yes, I will try my best. Thank you to everyone joining online. I'm Daisy Pearson. I'm in the movement building team at Global Justice Now. For those of you who don't know us, we're a UK-based campaigning organisation. We campaign on all economic and global justice issues, particularly campaigning in solidarity with communities in the global south. We have a UK-based network of activist groups who are all across the country, including a youth network. If anyone's interested in getting involved in that, we've got stalls around today and you can find out more about that. I'm sure with so many people here, we do have a Q&A session at the end. We probably won't get around to everyone. And unfortunately, to people who are on Zoom watching the live stream, I'm afraid we haven't been able to set up the Q&A function for that. But you can introduce yourselves in the chat and chat amongst yourselves. Before I get started, I especially want to thank people who helped make this conference possible. So we've had a lot of people very kindly donated when you booked your tickets. So thank you for that. And thank you so much to Balanced Economy Project, who have helped us put this conference on. They're co-hosting this event. If you don't know who they are, they're a not-for-profit, globally focused, anti-monopoly organisation whose mission is to reclaim our ability to restructure our economies by collectively constraining corporate power and building a genuinely democratic economy. Their director, Claire Godfrey, is here with us today. She's talking on the trade session later, which I highly recommend, so go check that out, especially if you're interested in monopolies in that area. Okay, I'm going to hand over to our wonderful speakers soon. I'm delighted that we have, on my far right, Dan McQuillan.
Not the far right.
Not the far right, not the far right.
We're doing a session on techno-fascist today. Really want to make it clear it's not promoted.
Otherwise, we've really got this one. Dan McQuillan is a senior lecturer in critical AI at Goldsmiths, which I didn't even know was a subject, so it's really cool, at the University of London. His diverse experience includes a PhD in experimental particle physics, running social tech camps in Kyrgyzstan and Sarajevo, and working for Amnesty International and the NHS. He is the author of Resisting AI, an anti-fascist approach to artificial intelligence, which we are selling at the bookstall here, and I highly recommend. Next, we've got Anita Gurumurthy, who's joined us all the way from India. She is Executive Director of the Indian Advocacy Group, IT to Change. She works on data and IT governance, platform regulation, feminist frameworks of digital justice. She serves as an expert on various bodies, including the UN's, I actually can't remember what it stands for, STD,
The Commission on Science and Technology for Development.
thank you so much, I've written that out, and their working group on data governance. Thank you, Anita, for joining us. And next we've got Dearden, the Director of Global Justice Now, many of you are familiar with Nick. He's been a leading campaigner against corporate globalization and for global ethical justice for over 25 years. He is the author of Pharmanomics, How Big Pharma Threatens Global Health, which we also have on sale at the bookshop. Do we need mics?
It's a little bit quiet.
They assured us that they're fancy high-tech room and you never know. Okay, how's that? It's all right. I wasn't saying anything that important anyway. These guys are. Cool. Right. Where's my sorry. I know the question. I'm starting with, I'm going to do this in 2 rounds. I'm going to ask all the speakers first to tell me about our use of the word empire. Why are we using this word? What does it mean in particular for your area of work? And how can it help us understand the current moment? Like what's happening in this kind of technological revolution that we're all experiencing? So I'm going to hand to Anita first, and I'll just put the slides up.
For those sitting on the stairs over there, there are a couple more spaces just over here. I can see like 3 or 4. If you'd like to come over, if you don't want to sit on the stairs. Maybe 5.
Just to get started, I'm not going to do slides all the way through, but this is just to begin the conversation. So I want to ask you if any of you recognize what this picture could be. Has someone there? Yes? Right. Yeah, but I'm going to explain it. So this is in South India. A young person, younger than 30, is standing at his desk and starts this job of the day, which is folding hand towels a million times, as precisely as possible. Obviously, he's not in the towel industry. He's just doing this because he's training. So this is happening in tailoring and garment units. It's happening everywhere in the service industry. And this is basically a high-powered camera which is capturing human actions again and again and again. And here he has to actually fold it in a certain way that is instructed by the company that is training the data. So he has to put it in a certain way, then shape the towel, fold it neatly, and then put it away in the left corner of the desk. If he misses any steps, if it takes longer, he has to start all over again. And this is, of course, for Silicon Valley companies. And and the saddest part of all of this is these are extra qualified engineers in India. And actually, you're having to do 200 videos per day. And this is, and this is really very commonplace. I'm going to tell you the next story. Anybody recognizes this picture? They are, but do you know which country? South Africa. Right. So I'm going to introduce a new idea here, the idea of economic disappearance. We've all been very, very familiar with economic dispossession. We know extractivism, we know what all that is about in empire. But we really have to understand what the AI paradigm is going to do to the global south, particularly the African continent. In South Africa, as of today, 3.7 million people are classified as discouraged work seekers, basically people who have given up looking for employment. And this is because structurally South Africa is struggling to create institutions, to create a productive dynamic in the economy. And even though the IMF projects that the economy will grow at about 1.4% in 2026, which is really a low figure, the persistent constraints really affect the next generation. And these are deep governance challenges, but the growth story is really not enough to capture this. What's happening is a hollowing out beneath the surface of future hope, future possibility. And the whole idea of unemployment in economistic terms suggests waiting, right? You're waiting to get a job. But economic disappearance is not that. Economic disappearance suggests erosion. It just destroys the possibilities that the next generation has, and it's an erosion of confidence, it's an erosion of skills, it's de-skilling and dehumanizing tendencies of the current economy. And once individuals spend a kind of sufficient amount of time or a period outside the labor market, their confidence to return just goes down. And this is when exclusion becomes structural, it's programmed into the dynamics of the kind of global economy that we're all in. And my final story, not very hard to guess. But who? This is a delivery worker, but female delivery worker in India. And female Uber drivers, we've done many studies of this kind of highly, much wanted flexibilization, that the flexibilities that are available for women. But research that's been done by many people suggests that altogether different story. Women drivers can simply not drive during peak hours. So the advantage that male drivers get because of dynamic pricing, they don't get. So they have to drive twice as harder for longer hours just to make the same amount of money, despite equal pay for equal work laws around the world. This is very high stakes because Jyoti, in this instance, is really, she has to take care of the unpaid work at home, and her child has developmental delays. But her absence actually means she's letting down her child. I mean, I do not want to really make this an emotive issue at all. I would really like to keep it within the realm of an analysis that is realistic. But what I want to really say is that for very long, we've been ignoring the kind of interconnected issues of the human condition in the global south. What the data centers debate has done is kind of visibilize the material consequences everywhere in the world. But what is really invisible is the way in which production and social reproduction are dramatically changing. And this is something that the South is going to bear the brunt of in a very disproportionate way. And call it whatever, we might call it the neocolonial dynamics of the digital economy, tech colonialism, data colonialism, what have you. But beyond all those debates is this reality, and I think it's a story of dispossession, extraction, and disappearance. It's essentially a question for intergenerational justice. All of you may have heard of Abdullah Berhani in her work, Algorithmic Colonization of Africa, and she talks about how big tech sits really at this outline of the old empire's geopolitical and geoeconomic dynamics, right? I mean, the ships kind of sailed and East India Company was set up. And then since then has been a kind of a dynamic in the subcontinent from where I come. But what I wanted to also say is that traditional colonialism was spearheaded by a kind of vision of empire that was mostly geopolitical, but this is now a point of time when the geoeconomic and geopolitical forces are increasing. And this, I think, is extremely important to understand, and I'd really like to conclude with a few remarks, which is that We do understand the datafication of human lives and life worlds, but we also need to pay attention, I think, to a lot of developments in the cloud capitalist economy. And this is when the economy shifts from an asset-light framework of the previous era platforms, into a new form of capital arrangement. And this is very important to understand the rise of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, when a lot of other platform firms, including Uber, for instance, has to actually buy cloud space, and they are entirely dependent for their business on these cloud capitalists. And therefore, our reading of Empire needs to be very situated, understand the dynamics of who is really very powerful in that web of, very incestuous web of, network power. And I'd also like to conclude with a couple of thoughts on accountability. And I think large language models, which are just enclosures, which hold up this kind of monoculture of mostly an American imagination of meaning and semantic, is a huge problem, because all of humanity's diversity, the way in which we think, process, interconnect, and relate, all of this is now brought into a certain paradigm of automated language. And I think that this is imperialism of an order of, I think, intensification. Always meaning was made by the hegemonic powers, but now meaning is constructed in ways in which you program them into infrastructural realities. And therefore, I think this religion of dataism, where AI is the only truth and it's the a priori truth, right? Even before you can make sense of it, it's given to you. This, I think, is really difficult. I'd like to point that even powers with the European Union have really not been able to resist the big tech lobby, and big tech has argued extensively to dilute the Aarhus Convention. The Aarhus Convention, which talks about public consultations in the environment matters as a right of the public, that is being diluted for data centers. So you have an altogether new form of exceptionalism in this economy, and I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Straight over to you, Dan. Do you want me to repeat the question? The question is, why are we talking about empire? What does that word mean, and how does it help us understand the current technological developments?
Thanks very much. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah. So I'm not totally sure there are big tech empires, but there are definitely big tech corporations in the middle of what I think is a world system collapse. So the rules-based order, I think, was always a cover story, but it's definitely tanking. The power is shifting. It's an interregnum, time in between. And I think AI is a morbid symptom of that. When I'm talking about AI, I'm being specific. I mean technologies that are based on neural networks. So that includes transformer models, which is what we normally think of as ChatGPT. My first real argument to you guys is that it's important to realize that AI is not a powerful technology. At least not in the sense that we normally claim. All it does inside is correlations. So it's pattern finding. And now, obviously, pattern generation. There's no causation, no physics model, none of that stuff. It's also very reductive and very abstract, which means it's basically pretty unable to deal with the complexity of the world. It doesn't do context, it doesn't do relationality, none of that. So really, it's very, very complex. It's genuinely complex inside, but also very, very flaky. So it isn't really a powerful technology in itself, but it is the point of convergence. Because
people are having trouble.
I was worried about Okay, so you have to scheme. Okay, get on with it. So what? So right. So it's powerful in this sense. It's really a point where a lot of forces focus, and they focus on it because they genuinely see it as a way to hold on to power in the changing conditions. And AI, I think, trying to respond to the question, it definitely has some empire-like aspects. And one of those is this need for continuous growth and continuous expansion, right? In AI, it's called scaling. That's the industry term for it. But it's really, so that's the push. We've gone from millions of parameters to billions of parameters, and now trillions of parameters. And that's really it's the AI corollary of GDP. It's like GDP, right? It's a meaningless number, which is basically sociopathic in that it doesn't care about what the consequences are. And this accelerating growth visibly material in the data centers, which is sucking up electricity and water, but also in the way they manufacture it demands this control of the mineral supply chain, so it gets straight into geopolitics that way. Another big overlap with empire is eugenics, because the I in artificial intelligence, that concept of intelligence, or really the concept of intelligence per se, it comes straight from a couple of guys called Gurumurthy and Pearson, and that was their way of justifying the British Empire through biology. And actually, the computation operations of AI internally, right? They repeat this. They repeat this segregation and stratification. So, I don't necessarily think that these corporations are, or that there is such a thing as big tech empires per se, but I do think, reflecting on the question again, that these corporations have some characteristics in common with the East India Company, actually. They are very ideological. You see that Palantir, we were talking about. They're very interventionist, and they're increasingly getting involved they're increasingly wedded to military adventure. Because unfortunately, having slagged off AI, that the aspects of AI that make it pretty useful, pretty useless, I would say in social settings, which is its innate tendency to create through out of distribution errors, hallucinations, or all that other stuff. That stops being a problem if you're in a conflict where maximum and discriminate damage is the actual point. Right, so it's no good at home, it's no good for us, actually it serves a function in war. So I think it's also, I'd like to track it down time. Halfway through, that's not what you, yeah. I think it's equally important to focus on energy, as well as the militarization. So, as somebody who's kind of in the business, it's been very weird to watch this shift. Instead of talking about computational power, the scale of those models, you normally talk in terms of a weird thing called FLOP, right? Floating point operations. That doesn't really get discussed, or even the scale of computers. Now, energy. You guys have seen this, right? The new data centers are accounted for, boasted in terms of gigawatts of energy. And I think, what do I think? Yeah, I think this is the imperial pattern, right? Promethean tech and burning as much energy as possible. And something I came across a while ago was the writings of a guy called Ernst Jünger. He's an ultranationalist from Germany in the 1930s. And he had this idea of total mobilization. The idea that all the material and energy resources of a nation will be forged into a new technological order. The conversion of life itself into energy, driven relentlessly to seize matter, movement, and force through the formalism of technoscience, to legitimate a new political order based on the vitalism of conflict. And it all sounds, well, to me anyway, it sounded horribly familiar. But anyway, whether or not that's happening, AI itself, I strongly argue, is an engine of precaritization and necropolity. Right? So that form of power, which discriminates not just in allocating the distribution of resources, who gets the necessities for life, but also to organize the brain. I think this really has some overlaps. I think this has some overlaps with what I'm talking about. Right? So it's really increasing, it's the technology for increasing vulnerability to death. Its direction of travel is to define who is disposable. So AI, just to try and put a few, maybe preempt a few questions, I think AI is useless for social reproduction, right? Because shoddy simulation is no substitute for real care. You can't make worker-friendly AI. This stuff is anti-worker, Dr. Hodgson. You can't make planet-friendly AI. This stuff burns resources and it produces bullshit. The whole AI assemblage is extinct. And I say that in two senses. One is the guy who's actually involved in the whole AI scene over the last few decades. But mainly I'm saying it because it's an apparatus of concentrated masculine power and abuse at scale. It's textbook accelerationism. So that's it. I believe we should go further and faster. Our tech should be overclocked to the point of meltdown in order to break through the barriers between us and a new era. It isn't inevitable And I don't think there's any way we can go back to pre-AI age, because AI is just an amplifier of the problems we already have. And it encourages thoughts, it encourages reduced expression, it encourages exclusion, exclusionary normativity, really. Again, I think some overlaps with what Anita said. Most of all, what I think it reveals is nihilism, right? The nihilist exclusionism of those who refuse to give up even 1 inch of power. It's a mask-off technique for a very mask-off time. It's a reminder that in the eyes of the powerful, the rest of us are expendable. Wherever AI proposes a solution, there are already people that need fixing in some other way, mostly by people doing people stuff. More doctors, more nurses, more teachers, more care workers. But we also need to check and question the ideologies that underpin this stuff, like productivism, like efficiency, and even, of course, the whole continuation of colonialism, which makes it impossible in the first place. So I'll just finish on saying, there's this widespread compulsion to preface any criticism of AI by saying, of course, it has great potential for X, Y, and Z. Okay? And I'm saying it mostly doesn't. It really, really doesn't. And we should just understand that every day we make excuses for AI is another day of real material harms. It's another day when real problems are hidden behind a smokescreen of high tech. And it's another day when we're sleepwalking into a more fascist world.
Very powerful. Thank you. So, over to you, Nick.
Thank you. I'll give it a 1. I think you made a really good case for big tech empires. Look, we as an organisation are fairly new to this. We work on global economy. And I think big tech and AI have been described for a long time as a major problem for privacy and for our individual human rights. And I'm certainly not saying that's not an important part of the equation. But I think the reason that as an organisation that works in the global economy, this conference has been really oversubscribed is the fact there's a sense now among many people in the world that beneath the claims of AI, something big is happening to the structure of the global economy, and these big tech giants are at the centre of it. Big tech has indeed become synonymous with the greatest disparity in wealth and power that the world has ever seen. 8 out of 10 of the richest men in the world made their fortune from big tech corporations. And that's unsurprising because big tech corporations are some of the most profitable in the world. In fact, increasingly, the whole economic growth model is tied to corporations invested in AI. The vast majority, almost all of the gains that were made on the US stock market last year were related to AI development. And they are making obscene amounts of money, not because there is something, as Dan says, there's something incredibly creative and innovative going on here, but because they have monopolized forms of technology exactly as the robber barons did 100 years ago. So these big tech empires are right at the center of an economy that I believe can only be described as monopoly capitalism. They have a stranglehold on how our economy, and therefore how our society in many ways, will develop if we don't challenge and resist them. They're using their economic power to charge higher prices, to capture markets, to enclose knowledge that could perhaps, if shared openly and used in a different way, make society better, but it certainly won't if they continue to monopolize it. And in turn, that gives them the power to make key decisions about how our economy will operate. Power that really, if we were a genuine democracy, should be made by the public through democratic systems. So these big tech giants have the power to decide where society's resources are employed and how and to what purpose. And to make those decisions not based in any way at all, despite what they may claim on the public, on the part of the public interest, but how they can further enrich themselves and their friends. That's how this economy is working. And as I say, I think we've seen something like this before at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, when the original robber barons, whose names we also knew, just as we know Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg today, I'm talking about the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts, how they captured new technologies like railways and the financing of railways and steel and so on, and drove tremendous inequality, tremendous suffering. And in turn, that inequality drove a struggle for new markets and new sources of materials overseas, because increasingly those business empires could not grow on the basis of the masses that they had impoverished in the United States. And so there was a global scramble for markets and materials. And that happened at the end of the 19th century. And we know what the end point of that was, right? The wars of the 20th century. That's what Lenin meant when he talked about imperialism as the monopoly stage of capitalism. As giant corporations worked with states to secure their control overseas, and total war became more and more inevitable as a result of that. And I think the tech empires understand that too. You know, those who previously said, we won't have anything to do with the military, we're good Silicon Valley liberals, have turned on a dime over the last 5 years. They've completely ditched that. And many of them have been utterly complicit in the first live stream genocide in history in Palestine. Their money is increasingly coming from Trump's $1 trillion plus a year war machine. And Palantir's much commented on tweet this week says it all. The ability of what they call free and democratic societies, that's us, to prevail requires something more than moral appeal, Palantir say. It requires hard power, and hard power in this century will be built on software. The question is not where the AI weapons will be built, it is who will build them and for what purpose. Absolutely chilling. And so that's what we're seeing. We're seeing these people who previously would have said, we want nothing to do with a guy like Trump, suddenly coming in to his fold. Many of us in this room may have thought that President Biden was far too timid in his economic policy. But for people like Mark Zuckerberg, Biden was a communist. Biden wanted to take his wealth and break up his empire. And he realized a truth, and it's a truth that Louis Brandeis said 100 years ago, in the age of the first robber barons. We may have democracy, or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both. That's something Mark Zuckerberg realizes, and the deal he made with the devil, the deal he made with Trump has been very good for him. 5 of the richest tech giants increased their wealth by well over $1 trillion in Trump's first year. $1 trillion, 5 people. But it's not worked for the rest of us, because clearly this can only come through hollowing out our democracy, precisely because this wealth comes from the kind of exploitation that Anita has described of workers, of the environment, of the world's resources, and from using their position of control to enclose and privatize knowledge. These are genuinely extractive industries. And for that reason, I think we have something in common with people who are struggling against this right across the global south. And I think a fight back is possible, and I think it can only happen on the basis of that international movement, which is why I'm so pleased that Anita has joined us this week. What I want to finish with is to say that I think the UK government's strategy to date on this has been as dangerous as it is embarrassing. So just as Britain's establishment has liked to think of itself since the Second World War as a junior partner with the United States, we can help them run the world and get a bit of a kickback for that. And even if that means giving up on the idea of an independent foreign policy, well, that's a price worth paying for our elites. So when it comes to the development of AI, we have decided to be little more than an aircraft carrier for US big tech. When Trump came on his state visit last September, behind the cringeworthiness of the whole event, a group of tech barons accompanied him, and they sat with him and the king while they had dinner in Windsor Castle. And they got what they wanted. A series of data centers is gradually being built. The terms of the agreements under which they're being built remain secret, but it wouldn't surprise us at all if it includes priority access to energy and other resources, because that's what these deals tend to include. But it also means, it's also given them a way of continually being able to bully the British government. So just this week, we saw, as James said, Trump come out and say, well, that deal means nothing if you don't now drop your digital services tax. And this will go on and on and on. Trump has already suspended parts of the agreement he doesn't like because of what the government's begun to regulate on online harms. OpenAI has said it won't proceed at the moment with its data center that it said it was going to build because it's worried about how AI can't use copyrighted material in the way that it wants to in the UK. And that's before you look at all the awful contracts with Palantir, giving them reach deep into the NHS, the police, and the MOD. So we are playing the role of a vassal state here, and we cannot continue in this way if we're going to protect the people of this country and join the wonderful struggles that are going on right across the global south that are so important. So it is absolutely vital that we declare our independence from Trump's USA and begin to build a very, very different policy on big tech. And I think it's going to be up to us, ordinary citizens, to fight and to demand that our government change its position.
Thank you so much, Nick. Next, I want to talk about. So obviously, you know, our conference is called Resisting Big Tech Empires. We're a very activist organisation. We're all here because we want to do something about it. It's a day of political education, but we also want to be like, well, what does this mean? How do we resist it? What comes next? So I want to go back to each of the speakers now and go, what does the conversation that we just had and those analyses of whether it's historical comparisons or understanding the sort of infrastructure and power relations of today's big tech networks, what does that mean for our strategies of resistance?
I just wanted to say that your reference to eugenics and disposability really resonates because I do feel that people who are folding towels are those that don't even know that the robot will actually displace them. So you are actually being signed up into a complicity of your own suicide. It's so tragic. I mean, and it's actually a structural pattern, right? Another that we see in countries like mine and the Philippines is also content governance modalities. Because big tech would really like to outsource this systematic experience of people looking at content and labeling them as not, befitting human consumption. Many of these young people are severely traumatized. They are from Africa, they are from India, they are from the Philippines. And one wonders how the psychological well-being of those young people can be treated so differently from the rest of the world, the northern world. And in that sense, I would also like to point to a movement in Europe and in the UK of a lot of tech-first activism in which the idea of AI red lines is extremely important. And these red lines, of course we don't need red lines. If we cannot do away with the damn thing, we don't need red lines. But the red lines are in the realm of the ozone layer. They are, of course, and quite pertinently, they are about the whole idea of lethal autonomous weapons and killer switches, the whole weaponization of AI for war, etc. But I always wonder why those baselines are never about human well-being. We should actually outlaw entirely, abolish content moderation by human beings that subjects them through this kind of dehumanizing task of identifying what may be unconsumable content, awful content. Because that then makes them completely and entirely, I think, unable to appreciate and empathize with the rest of humanity. We're just subjecting people to rape videos and transsexual abuse material, screens and screens and screens that are going through for 8 hours a day. So I do feel that in the politicization of our debate, I think it's extremely important to bring in unfashionable and things that don't seem to be imminent, but things that can coexist somewhere in the background as vital in our collective struggle. It's about indignity. It's really about treating every human being as having their integral dignity. I would also like to bring ideas of the value chain. We already have, hard-fought gains. For instance, my organization is part of the OECD Watch, And the whole idea is, if there is a commitment that you make within Europe in order to meet certain standards, those benchmarks should be applicable to the entirety of the value chain. So an Uber driver in Amsterdam, deserves as much as an Uber driver in New Delhi would. And very often, these companies really don't do that. And we need civil society activism to call out the fact of this kind of discrepancy in the way in which workers in the value chains are treated. But of course, there is also the vision, and maybe Dan, we should talk about it later, of is a certain boutique, frugal, artisanal AI possible? And it is something which let's call is in the realm of data science, right? I mean, AI already is being liquefied. Therefore, if we looked at data science and we looked at the assistance that data science has provided all these, centuries to teachers, to doctors, to the scientific community, and to the institutions, what would a decentralized and locally controlled, accountable system look like? And that is really an important thing. I often look at, I don't know, I think many of you may know of this, the design justice community, and these are usually, mostly that kind of wave of civil society activism began in the US. And the idea is to fix AI for bias and discrimination. And in my view, that's a kind of an endless, loop to infinity you can never fix. So I think that the design justice community has to also understand the context of the structures in which we operate, the trade structures, the tax structures, and therefore technical fixes are never going to fix for structures that are unjust, patently unjust. And here I think the global asymmetries of power have now really gone above the roof. It's not just trade and tariffs, but we really don't have any modicum of fiscal justice, and the people who have stolen data from the global south, from everywhere, and enclosed it, really have to give back. And these are the people who should be taxed internationally. They should be taxed because they have to contribute to the public finance that may be needed at the level of the United Nations, which then should actually build and support countries to envision the kind of infrastructural futures they want. Because it's not for us to determine, like the World Bank and the IMF, this is the infrastructure that's suitable for you, which is the big dam story all over again. So we really need an alternative conception of task-oriented, smaller AI perhaps, and we need to recognize that the fundamental shifts are not just technological. Of course, we have the technology to enable decentralized models, but I think we need another vision of a regenerative economics and a regenerative technological paradigm. And regen AI is where we could be going, provided we really have the conditions to promote diversified economies, epistemic justice in the global south, labor futures for all, which is dignity for all, and ecological justice.
Thank you so much, Anita. I'm going to pass over to Dan. And I think one of the really exciting things for me about a conference of this length, all on one subject, where we've got kind of so many sessions throughout the day and so many different speakers, is actually being able to get deep into kind of, okay, what are some differences here? We've got some different perspectives on where we might need to go. And so, I'm really excited about, getting to hear all these different things. So I'll hand over to Dan. Who I believe might think differently about us.
Yeah, different. Well, I hope we get a bit of time to get into a discussion. But I'll make a pitch for strategies for resisting big tech empires, whether or not we think there are exactly that or whatever. Collective refusal, definitely. Okay, and I work at university, and we're being forced actually to adopt technologies that demonstrably and actually through other research clearly are shown to make people more stupid. Which I think is actually the point. That's another part. That's a broader, much more sinister political argument. That's definitely. We could start at work, where actually most people, in many situations, not just coding. I'm in the school of computing, but it's not just in coding that people are literally forced to use a certain number of tokens per week as part of their job. Even being forced to use this stuff. So that's a great place to start the collective resistance. But Most trade unions, as far as I can see, in this country, I don't have any kind of global overview, have drunk the AI Kool-Aid. And that's a big problem. The positive is that being against AI is a growing social movement that isn't yet conscious of itself, but it's there, right? There's a revulsion, there's a rejection. But in a way, the fact that so many people are pushing back against this stuff actually brings some of its own risks. When we're pushing back, we need to be aware of who we're standing with. And I think we need to be wary of doomers, who Anita was kind of referring to, I think. These are people who believe that the greatest risk of AI is that it will become super intelligent and then it will kill us all or find some other use for us. Okay? This is a delusion. And it's got more in common with the beliefs of the oligarchs in Silicon Valley than it has with the rest of us. I mean, excuse me, doomers. I think we also really need to be wary of the policy types who are talking about sovereignty. You're going to hear a lot more of that over the next year or so. AI sovereignty. Because I think that's just nationalism, it's just populism. And it's really the product of domestic elites who are panicking about their place in this new world order. And believe me, scattering, flag-flying data centers across the homeland is not going to fix any of the problems we were talking about before. The only kind of sovereignty AI is the kind that Carl Schmitt, he was the Nazi jurist, Carl Schmitt talked about, right? That sovereignty is the capacity to declare the state of exception. That's it, that's the sovereignty that AI brings. So I'd say that AI has shown us something, and if we worry about justice, we care about justice, we care about economic global justice, we care about monopoly, we need to care about techno-politics. We need to pay attention. Still? we need to pay attention to techno-politics, and I'm proposing, I should get on with it, a form of techno-politics I'm going to call decomputing. Okay? And that's something, total rule of thumb, something like people first, computing last, AI never. Okay? Just to sort of sum it up. Definitely resisting hyperscale data centers, these have been discussed, right? Because they are going to suck up the electricity, they're going to sabotage the grid, they're going to deplete the water tables. They're a form of low intensity conflict in communities, nothing else about it. But stopping the theft of electricity and water by data centers actually should make us ask, who has control of these resources in the first place? Who has control of these common good resources? And how the hell are they making the deals with these companies in the first place? How do we re-socialize these resources is the real question raised by something like the materiality of data centers and AI in general. So I think actually that weirdly, the advent of AI is a moment of techno-politicization, right? Because it's a moment where the immediate harms of AI, whether it's at your work or what it's doing to your kids or whether it's a data center down the road, they do provoke, not maybe for people in this room, because kind of by definition you're here, right? So you already care about these big questions. But I think in general, it's actually at a moment where we could draw some common lines between the materiality of the data centers, the overlapping social harms, the Amazon warehouses, the gig workers, the outsourced data labor that Anita was so viscerally describing, right? Also, the AI-powered targeting for welfare recipients, the AI-powered targeting for deportation, which is coming to the UK, the AI-powered targeting operating systems, which we've already discussed a little bit. This is all capitalist technology. This is all based on expansion and growth. So decomputing, I'm trying to start to describe it in the 20 seconds I've got left. It's a technopolitics of degrowth, for starters. Right? We need to break this cycle of expansion because that's also what drives the imperial and colonial motives behind all of these companies. We need to recognize that our mutual vulnerability in all these situations means we should look more at forms of organization that are based on mutual aid that don't depend on classifying people's needs according to algorithmic boundaries. That's not care. We need care. Right? We need more of what Illich called conviviality, which is developing tools that enable autonomy and adaptation and don't demand our conditioned response, or actually the forms of humiliation that Anita was talking about. That's what's holding up these tools, humiliation. So I'm arguing for decomputing as a form of prefigurative resistance. Okay? We need to get this automatization out of our lives. We need to transform our own social patterns. The way to resist AI is a way to do that. Because intersecting layers of horizontal, which proposes this idea of intersecting layers of horizontal governance at local, regional, an international level. It sounds complicated, it sounds tricky, but it's way less complicated than the technology we're supposed to bet our entire future, the entire future of the planet on. So decomputing, sorry for going over a little bit, is the prioritization of the periphery, definitely, and the periphery when it comes to visions and technologies. The aim of decomputing is to deactivate existing computational power and return to common use the technical means of making our own arrangements for infrastructure and economic business. Thanks very much.
So much. Straight to you.
Thank you very much. So I draw my hope from the fact that this revolution depends upon hyperscale data centers that are currently being built right now all around this country and all around the world, and they are deeply unpopular. In February, Time magazine in America ran a cover story called People versus AI. And it followed 9 Americans from all across the country, very different walks of life, very different political views. There was a pastor, there was a filmmaker, there was a former Google employee, and there was a colleague of Steve Bannon. And it built a picture of an immense opposition all across the United States to these enormous data centers. And it posited that in a society as divided as the US, opposition to data centers is increasingly becoming a point of unity. Now, the US has a far higher concentration of data centers than anywhere else in the world. But as a result of that, it is now the epicenter of global opposition to data centers. $156 billion worth of AI data center projects were halted in the United States last year by local opposition. Politicians, of course, like Bernie Sanders and AOC, but more centrist oppositions too, have begun introducing legislation at federal and state level for a nationwide pause in data center construction. The vast majority of states in the US have considered the introduction of regulation. Some have discussed full-scale moratorium. And big tech has even responded by promising its own voluntary schemes to theoretically protect consumers' electricity bills and so on. So they're scared about this. A really quite pro-corporate Democrat described AI as far more unpopular than ICE or the Iran war. He said it could cost Donald Trump more votes than any other issue. And Time magazine described the US as perhaps the most AI pessimistic country in the world. The Financial Times ran a piece saying, is AI the new fracking? Meaning, could it engender the kind of opposition that fracking did 10 years ago? I want to point to 2 very quick examples closer to home that I think we can look to for hope of how this could be our moment to stop this. First is in the 1990s. John Major, for those of you who remember, John Major announced the largest road building program since the Romans. 3,000 miles of new roads and 150 bypasses were to be built. Forests and ecosystems faced annihilation. It was absolutely huge, and it was part of an attempt to cement the car even further as the central form of public transport, of transport in this country, marginalizing public transport. And there were individual battles all around the country. Some people, those of you who are old enough to remember, will remember Swampy and the rest of them, who literally dug into holes and lived in trees for a while, stopping these things. But it wasn't only them. It wasn't only young idealistic people. It was conservative councillors. It was community groups. It was professional organisations that hated all of this. And they stopped it. And it was a big part of creating a huge new wave of opposition in this country to all manner of corporate control and globalisation. The second example is from the mid-2000s, when a Labour government was determined to build and replace a new generation of coal-fired power stations. And campaigners recognised that we had a very limited chance to stop this. And we particularly focused our efforts on Kingsnorth Power Station, really trying to toxify the government's plans with a mix of direct action, letter writing, community organising. The second climate camp in 2008 was held at Kingsnorth. Now in 2007, when the first direct action took place at Kingsnorth, coal supplied at least a third of the UK's electricity. Renewables were less than 6%. In 2008, 1 year later, as a result of the protest, Kingsnorth was shelled. Every other coal-fired power station quickly followed suit. Today, 0% percentage of our electricity comes from coal. So these are really interesting examples that at the time, you would all have sat here thinking, it's not going to be possible to stop. We can do our best, but it's not going to be possible to stop this. The government's committed to it. It's part of something even bigger going on in the global economy. But lots and lots of things don't seem possible until we make them happen.
Thank you so much, all of you, and for the breadth of different ideas and visions and strategies there. It feels it's really exciting and empowering. I think, again, one of our key themes of this conference is that this moment is a fight for the future. That what big tech are kind of looking to do is lock in a lot of their power in ways that would be really difficult to roll back. And I think, Dan said something earlier about, everyone always talks about AI in terms of potential, and I think we've lived through such a challenging, difficult kind of few decades of economics of there is no alternative, and climate crisis is coming whether we like it or not. And I think the global mood is low, and the only people speaking about positivity and vision and future are the big tech companies. And so they sell us this vision of, this is where we're heading, this is progress, this is positivity. And therefore you just have to accept everything that comes with that. But I think what we want to do here is they don't have a monopoly on vision. We can create that ourselves, and we need to reclaim the idea of the future from these big tech companies with the kind of, not just red lines, but sort of foundational agreements of what we want from our economy, what we want from our technology, that in particular Anita and Dan are talking about that. So yeah, thank you, that's really exciting. Okay, we've got some time for a Q&A. We are currently using the roaming mic, so who are my stewards? Guy. Pass this mic around, and there are some lapel mics on the table. Maybe I can take one of those, and you can take these. If you put your hands up for questions, I'll take about 3 at a time, and then we'll do as many rounds as we can. We'll start with one there.
Okay.
Who's got the first one?
Hi. So yeah, my question is, there's a critique within capitalism which looks at the hundreds of billions of dollars that private investors have been pouring into AI and says that this investment cannot generate sufficient profit, and therefore that a sort of a bubble is formed in the US stock market, and that the tech companies are desperately trying to sort of get out of the bubble by jamming AI into everything in the hope that they can eventually reap profits from it in time. And this idea that there is a bubble seems to have becoming mainstream. If the bubble were to deflate, what would be the implications for the power of big tech and for the solutions, the responses that you are proposing?
Brilliant, thank you. Oh, it does work, fantastic. Okay, I'll take one more at that.
Thank you. The argument for resisting data centers is very compelling, not just to protect local communities, but also as a way of denying ground to the big tech infrastructure. But what kind of strategies would it be useful to discuss? What strategies are there for, I guess, empowering the periphery? Because what will happen if we have successful campaigns here, like we had against the coal power, is that they'll just build it by the dams in India or wherever.
Thank you. Guy, do you want to take Maria? Oh, okay. We'll go to this gentleman up here then.
How do you see open source solutions and open source communities fitting into all this? Because they seem to be potential alternatives for people to turn to. And do you have any comment on China's deep sea? Because that seems to have grown a few pages in terms of the global tech balance.
I'm really sorry, I didn't personally hear the very first couple of words. Could you say at the beginning again?
Okay. How do the panel see open source communities and open source solutions fitting into the general picture?
Thank you. Okay, so we've got, is this a bubble? So many, like, the amount of economic money that's being invested into this requires huge profits as a return. What happens if that bubble deflates? But a question on internationalism and NIMBYism and open source communication. So anyone particularly want to go first?
That's a good technique, that is. That's brilliant. Yeah, okay, so the bubble. Yeah, I mean, obviously there is a bubble in a very real sense. I mean, I say obviously, I'm referring also to the things that Nick was saying. You know, the US stock market is more than 50% held up by this stuff at the very least. And, you know, it's never, ever going to generate the kind of returns that might make it into a kind of ordinary business where you're making the money to cover your debts and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the whole story. I mean, it's not the whole story in the sense that it's like any other bubble. The shit hits the fan, we're going to pay the price. It's going to be very bad. It like it was last time. In fact, all of this stuff is looped into some kind of recursive cycle with the last financial year. AI is nothing if not an austerity technology. It's to support austerity, which came from the last crunch. But I also think that it's the cozying up to the military thing is part of this as well. From the point of view of the tech companies, you know, how do you solve this unbridgeable gap between your commitments and your consumer income? It's the same answer as a timeless answer, at least in our political economy, which is you go for the military funding. So I think that's a big part of their motivation, actually. It's not the only part. I mean, these are genuinely ideological people, but they are also, you know, have to pay the bills. And so I think the military funding is part of it as well. And I think also it's just really, it would be, I never believe the market is a self-correcting thing or it's any of these kind of Hayekian mechanisms that it's made out to be. But I also think we are entering a very different period where rules will just be changed. Okay, and orders will be, the form of order will not follow necessarily the kind of patterns that we used to. So I'm in a way, I am worried about what happens if our pension funds get trashed by NVIDIA going down. Right? That's a really big problem, more immediate one. What I'm also worried about, what I'm actually worried about, is the solutions they come up for that problem. So.
Thank you. Anita.
Thank you. I mean, very sobering actually, because we do not want to, quite paradoxically, imagine a time when the bubble will burst, right? Because I think status quo is bad enough. So imagine getting to a worse place. But I feel that it is very true that the powers that be will simply huddle and regroup. And this keeps happening in history, and the reason now is quite clear. The writing is on the wall. And I was just talking about how both for Netflix and Uber, Google and AWS are important in the sense that these are monopolies who want other monopolies. And of course, the market out there, we know that OpenAI is not doing very well. I do feel that when things happen, it's really going to be a situation where there will be exactly like the COVID epidemic, and people said, hey, the underbelly of this kind of ruthless profiteering is out there for everyone to see. Now there will be a new world order. Nothing like that happened, and we saw, vaccine battles of, such a horrid variety that we couldn't even send vaccines for free to those who needed it. So I really feel that we are really on a high-speed train to nowhere, and therefore when this crashes, I don't think sanity will return very soon. We probably need time to pass. That doesn't sound like an optimistic reading. But I feel that the optimism is really about the periphery, and I think that people are not sitting and waiting for the train to crash. And I feel that one of the most interesting things is that, like all fractures, you will see, and thank you, Nick, for that wonderful story of people climbing trees and, different people doing little things everywhere. And I think that's really what it's going to be like. One case in Mexico that Meta loses sends a signal to the rest of Latin America. Similarly, one competition commission case that is won against Google in India, something happens to the Indian consumer market. And I also believe that the platform economy laws that are coming, to the global south, are taking a leaf out of the European Union to really see how unions have used, let's say, the DMA, workers' info exchange in the UK is doing some spectacular work of getting back driver data to build it all back together in order to have an aggregate picture, of how algorithms actually oppress workers. So I think there are very many such little fractures, and we do have alternative tech models already. Alternative AI is already being built by feminists and by universities for very, very ethical uses. So I do believe that it's actually the kind of wonderful unorchestrated chaos of solutions that's really going to give us the hope. And I'm sure, through the day we will hear of many more. On the China story and the open source communities, I think so far the open source community, in the sense of its organization through a tech brotherhood, is really not able to set itself aside of the centralized, corporatized capitalist model. And I think that all of us recognize that open washing is the name of the game, and all these large language models, people build on Llama. Indian languages are building, multimodal AI on top of these models, these foundation models, and then the model gets strengthened because that's the training data set that you're putting on top of it. Every time you search for something on Google, Gemini is learning through your prompts and nudges. And keeping something open doesn't necessarily mean you are creating a distributive economy of distributive justice, let alone redistributive justice. So I do think that open is not equal to decentralized power. And I think we do need very, very strong boundary conditions to negotiate openness in a manner that can create economic diversity. Thank you.
Nick, are you able to speak to the question of NIMBYism?
Yeah, I will
The role of
do.
international-
No, I will do that definitely. But I thought also Devin's question about the bubble was interesting. But it's no surprise there's a bubble, right? Because AI is almost a textbook example of how capitalism deals with crises. And so it's not surprising that there's a bubble. And what will happen when that bursts? I don't think anybody knows, and that's partly because it will be a site of huge struggle. But it will cause huge pain, I think, across the world. But what we make of that is kind of up to us. The default will be exactly like the financial crisis, I suspect, where public resources to shore up the wealth of the richest in the world, and we have to stop that. We have to stop that happening. It was really interesting. There's actually a government minister, I can't remember who it was now, who actually was talking the other day about universal basic income as a positive thing in order to deal with some of the implications of AI. I think that's extraordinary. That's the most, whatever you think of UBI, right? It's quite a radical proposal. The fact that government prefers to put that on, a government that never thinks radically, prefers to put that on the table than regulate the AI companies and big tech is absolutely extraordinary and a sign, I think, of what might be coming. So on the NIMBYism point, look, the whole point of us bringing Anita and Sophia here this week is precisely to try to ensure that internationalism is injected into our struggle against data centers. Because you're right. There is a little bit of hope that you can't simply, if you don't build it in Newcastle, you can just go to Morocco, right? It's not quite that straightforward because distance does matter in terms of where you build data centers compared to where the users are. But nonetheless, I think your point is quite right. And I actually don't object necessarily to NIMBYism in this struggle. And I think we have to say this is going to have to be a broad coalition of interests if we're actually to defeat this stuff. And of course, people are going to primarily be concerned about their own local issues and perhaps even what this looks like in my local area. So as a starting point, I don't necessarily object to that. I think our role as activists and campaigners is to transform the mindset of those people so they understand the structural nature of what it is that they're fighting. And when they stop the data center being built in Newcastle, we continue the international links and networks and campaigning with people who are fighting against data centers all the way around the world. And hopefully an organization like ours can play some useful role in that.
Thank you so much. Okay, time for a few more questions. The guy can take this lady here in the green t-shirt. We've got I'll stop. The lady in the green t-shirt, the green shirt. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. And then go next.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the vulnerability of physical infrastructure in the supply chain here, because almost every single super chip that's used for AI comes from one foundry in Taiwan. And also we've seen in this latest spate of conflict between Israel and Iran that a lot of infrastructure in the Gulf and these proposed data centers are going to be very vulnerable to kinetic warfare, or they're going to become economic hostages. And I was wondering if the panel could comment on whether this is going to gin up geopolitical tensions, particularly between the US and China in relation to that US foundry from TSMC.
Brilliant, thank you. And then do you want to just pass to the lady in front?
Hi, I work in a local government, and this year, in March 2026, there was a consultation for National Planning Policy Framework, which decides about planning policies and that's usually a prerogative of local government. And one of the consultation questions was giving priority to data centers because of the energy requirements. And obviously, was not aware of the structural of big tech inequalities that have been generated. But that was resisted more because it doesn't help with housing or local economy and the environmental implications. Is there any kind of work that's being done, like lobbying with the government? I know there's big tech lobbying, but is there, are we interested in doing that as well?
Great, thank you. And sorry, show of hands. We had a couple over here. I can't remember who's had their hands up last. Gentleman in green, jumper. The microphone coming from behind. And while we're waiting for the mic to arrive, I will just flag that we have a specific session on how to resist the data centre later, where we'll be going into that in quite a lot of depth as well. Obviously, it's a theme that's going to come up throughout the whole day.
Okay, thanks. My name's Dave King, and I'd just like to get the panel's response to a couple of quick things. One is all these characters up there. The link to eugenics that Dan mentioned is not just 100 years ago, it's happening now. They are funding companies to start genetically engineering human beings. And they're also backing other companies to be able to genetically select your embryo for the highest IQ. And I'm just wondering why nobody's really talking about this. Second point, and it's kind of answers your question actually about positive, hopeful ideas. This is the 50th year of the Lucas Plan, 50th anniversary. And for those who don't know, the Lucas Plan was an alternative plan for a military company called Lucas Aerospace to produce socially useful products. A plan created by the workers in the company in the mid-1970s. We're doing a conference later this year. I'm helping to organise it, and I think it's an idea that has a lot of popularity anyway.
Thank you very much. Do you want to just pass it? There was the lady behind you had a question as well. And that's the last one for this time.
Hi, thanks so much for the debates. I struggle with these discussions that are happening at the moment because there are very clear reasons for refusal and complete rejection of AI. But I am not convinced that the technology itself cannot be used if owned, controlled, governed, and manipulated somehow to generate some good. Okay, I think there are challenges there with of course, epistemic challenges. We cannot be led by those algorithms, but if owned, governed, and funded differently, and even thinking about the more decentralized and more energy resilient model, perhaps, of AI. Especially for people that you've been talking to in the Global South that might see and might have this as a benefit. And I struggle because usually as being small from the Global South and the North, I feel sometimes that it's all about let's sanitize ourselves from this mess, this thing that is dirty and is bad, and maybe you can afford to do that, but are there reasons not to do that in other places? Okay, so that's just my provocation, and I also don't think with the scale of the empire that we're seeing, it's possible to have. I wish it would, to have such a big church of different positions and different ways in which we respond to this. I wish we could afford that, but at some point we need to be a bit more clear what exactly we is going to be our response to this.
Thank you very much. Okay, go back to our speakers. Does anybody particularly want to go first?
I need to want to do that. Okay. So let me just thank you for your question about the Lucas plan. It seems to me with AI, we've almost got the Lucas plan in reverse, right? Where there was stuff. I mean, I'm really interested in this critical minerals block that Trump has put together. He's trying to get governments across the world to sign up for a critical minerals block. Now, we need critical minerals to some degree in order to build renewable infrastructure and so on, stuff that we probably all agree is necessary, at least, and that will require some new metals and minerals. Trump is trying to get everyone to sign up into a plan so that they're not trading critical minerals with China, but his plan, his trade deal for this does not mention renewable energy at all. So, I mean, it is literally diverting the resources that we so desperately need in order to change our society to deal with climate change into a kind of military national project. And I think all of the tech companies as well, tech companies, as I've already said, that once upon a time said we wouldn't go near the military, are increasingly translating themselves into military corporations. So I think remembering that is really important, because to show that we can also go in the opposite direction if we have the industrial muscle and if we have the popular support and so on is really important. So thank you for doing that work. I'll come back to this last point. Look, could it be useful? And I know you're going to have many more thoughts on this than me, Anita. But look, I think the first bit of what I would say is, of course, some of this may have useful applications. And Dan's going to be really skeptical about this, maybe Anita less so. But I mean, I'm happy to assume that this technology could have useful uses that would make society better. But those uses cannot possibly be premised on the rollout of AI as is currently happening, because the planet simply can't afford those resources. We can't afford the scale of data centers and so on that we're currently talking about. So we need a fundamentally different model. And I think you talked about, Anita, I really like your description of frugal use of AI, right? If we can discover some purpose to this stuff that is genuinely useful, then let's prioritize it. But we need to be really careful about how we prioritize it, because the resources it's consuming are just absolutely enormous. The government admitted yesterday, it kind of leaked this thing out, which basically the initial energy use that they'd said this was going to take, it had gone up by 100-fold. So it's really clear that this stuff is completely unsustainable. And I think the way that it's controlled now, it is clearly not going to be used in a way that's useful. I mean, I kind of compare it in some ways to genetic modification. I don't know in an ideal society whether this would be something that would be useful to society or not, but we absolutely know in the society that we live in now that it would simply increase the control of corporate agriculture over farmers everywhere in the world and over our food systems everywhere in the world. And so I think to resist that is for me the number one priority. And of course, There are problems with hunger and many other issues around the world. But if we're honest about it, that problem stems from our economic system, not from our technological ability to feed everybody in the world. So, I just think we've got to question this idea that AI is a kind of magic wand that can solve all of our problems. We have the answers to our problems, but they're based in politics and economics.
Lots of great comments and points, and I don't know that we have easy answers. So about vulnerability of physical infrastructures, I think that was also a pre-AI internet problem. All of us know of these stories of airports shutting down and airlines becoming paralyzed. Of course, we're talking of an order of killer switch instances that have only multiplied. And I think that even with respect to the infrastructural dependence on these very, very small production hubs, I think that this does pave the way for an extraordinary degree of shift in terms of geopolitical power. And yes, I think that's something that we really need to contend with. I really don't know what else may be said in that regard, but I do know that with the semiconductor chip and rare mineral dependence between the US and China, there seems to be a delicate balance there that both countries, earlier this year went and said, okay, let's de-escalate. So these are the powerful trying to negotiate on the behalf of global infrastructure. Not at all an ideal case, because infrastructures have to be really under public control. And so that describes, in fact, the nature of the problem in some sense. With respect to local politics, local government, I feel that the cart, is ahead of the horse, because we want to build data centers without really having national systems of measurement in place. Usually, with big dams and use of water, we have this entire idea of not just, assessments that are about, looking at whether this is earthquake-prone zone or whatever, but the whole social assessment became intrinsic to big dams. But we really don't have any framework, any national framework through which the public can enter deliberations and a debate very legitimately for demanding to know what the real costs of a data center would be. So I think that we need to move in that direction of asking for frameworks that are binding before something is built. Because, what is the point post facto of wondering where all the, groundwater is going, etc. So we need, I think, assessment frameworks for estimating the real costs of, in a very, very futuristic way. I also wanted to say about this thing that secretly all of us start thinking about the right to refusal, and then you imagine that you can't use Google Maps to cross the road, then what will happen when we end up in that predicament. So, but I can safely say that, my conveniences and also my analytical pessimism should not interfere with the way in which I look at the way in which people should and want to be part of opportunities. In that regard, I can safely say that this is one issue where, a very aware intelligentsia in the north and the ordinary person in the south are extremely well aligned. Both of them want to refuse and reject AI. That's because much of what passes off for AI today, if I may qualify it that way, is really a solution in search of a problem. And it's really that hammer and nail thing, looking for nails everywhere. And from our governments who are, beholden to big tech that come and offer solutions by telling you that all of your, medical systems, clinics will become super efficient. So buy this software, and then telling the school system, buy this edtech software, and your students are going to be the next Einstein. It's really like that. I mean, and I'm not at all even stretching it to absurdity. I am really talking about how this is sold. And I think, and this is bought. If you think the irony is in selling it through this overstatement, I mean, the tragedy is in buying it, with all the conviction. So I really don't know where all of this will end unless you put a stop to it through civil society action. because the harm is written out there for so many welfare recipients who are people waiting for pensions as low as 300 rupees, which is like what, $3 a month. And these are people who are outside of the system because AI optimizes for who is a deserving citizen. Come on. I mean, so this is a kind of thing, sorry, I have to wind up. And therefore, I want to say that the risk assessment debate in the European Union has deserved a lot of attention, quite rightfully so. There's no idea of post-market assessment in our imagination. Once things start rolling, how do you measure them? We really don't know. So we have to be very, very careful.
We are running out of time, so Dan, do you want to give any answer that you want to those questions and also build in your final remarks?
I don't actually have final. I'll just make these my final remarks. Yeah. Okay. So on the supply chain thing, I mean, there's no quick answer to it. I think it's just very revealing. I tend to agree with Anita that actually it's not going to be a problem from the China-US point of view. They've got more in common with keeping it going than they have with interrupting it. But I do think it's like all of this stuff. AI is a focus that's very revealing. It reveals to all of us, as if you didn't know, everybody in here does, the importance of these supply chains, which is also true for other things, and also raises questions for like the lithium supply chain for our so-called green economy. That should be a question. Or other supply chains which are coming back into fashion now, which I wanted to drop in, which was nuclear. Right? And the idea of nuclear as a green technology. And the idea of nuclear, which has these incredible, similar supply chain. There's a nuclear renaissance now, believe it or not, and that's thanks to AI. Because what I'm really worried about here is there's going to be kind of feedback. AI will flop, but the nuclear renaissance will take over there, as well as the genetics, which we'll come to in a second. And what do I want to say about the UK and its local planning stuff? I can't remember what the correct is, but something like critical national infrastructure. So it's a whole different. Okay, what is the UK world leading in? It's world leading in being AI pill. It's the most AI pill government on the planet because it doesn't have any other answers to anything. I mean, in terms of AI for good, we really don't have the conversation or time to get really into it. But I just say, it really isn't there. Okay, this isn't a technology you can use for something else. Honestly, I'm happy to discuss with anybody in the corridors or wherever. This technology is race science as a mode of computation. That's it. So if you can think of a way to do race science for good, but it isn't doing anything. This kind of AI, I'm talking very specifically. I'm talking about neural networks, transformer models, and that kind of stuff. It ain't happening. And it ain't ever going to be proven. Because it just doesn't work. It doesn't even do what it does as a provable thing. So we can get into all the discussions about machine learning and everything else we want to. Last thing I'd like to say is about, Lucas happens to be in the book, which I didn't realize was going to be here. That's a very nice coincidence, because I totally agree with Dave, the importance of it. I'd really recommend people checking out the GKN Factory Collective in Italy. There's another example, because it's a little template and Anita emphasized the importance of doing small things happen. It's a case where people were booted out of their factory by a futures fund or whatever, took it over, but they then formed not just a workers' council, but a community council. What should we build instead? They took climate into account, right? So they're now building cargo bikes, and I think they're trying solar panels, and they're still community government. This is a model, right? There are totally different ways of doing it. It is bottom up. It doesn't sound big and powerful and sexy or whatever. There's the way things are going to change if they're going to change. So, shout out.
Okay, we're out of time, but that was fascinating. Thank you so much to all of our three brilliant speakers. Thank you for some fantastic questions. We're about to go for a lunch break. First, I'm just going to hand over to Sam to say a quick word about the Youth Network and some exciting stuff that we've got coming up.
Thank you, Daisy. Thank you, everybody. My name's Sam. I coordinate Global Justice Now's Youth Network nationally. I just wanted to do a quick shout out about that because there are a few under 30s in the room, and we'd like to encourage you to join the network. Basically, it's for under 30s, like I say, and basically we campaign on corporate power and the root causes of inequality in our society, and we campaign nationally. So the network's national. We have groups up and down the country, and there's including one in London, and we have some members of our London group here. If you guys want to do a little wave, you're down at the front here, and also some people from the Sussex group as well. So if you're from the southeast, come and say hello to us. We are on a stall at the back of the room next door, and you can come and learn a little bit more about the network. And I think I've been told to be very fast.
Yeah.
So what else can I say? Basically, yeah, we campaign on global justice, now issues, global, international issues, the root causes of corporate of global inequality, looking at neocolonialism, climate change, all the important things. If you're an internationalist, come and join us. If you're under 30, come and chat to us. We've got a summer school coming up in June as well, so we'd like to invite you to that. Find out more about that on the stall. We have a really great lineup of speakers at that as well. So there you go. That's my quickest way of doing that. So yeah, come and chat to us. Nice one.
Thank you so much. And you're released for lunch. However, we are about to do a photo call. If you want to get involved, please do. So one of the main themes that will come up a lot today is Palantir. Nick talked about it.